Okay, so I'm going to try something a little different again today. I'm going to work on this piece a little bit while I talk to you about kind of what's a good strategy for working, how not to get too stale, using yourself as kind of your immediate audience. You know, I say you don't make it for yourself all the time, but of course you always do also make it for yourself. So, and then kind of what defines good and bad, or what's working and not working. And then a little bit about like, and this goes into both what's stale and what's good and what's bad, and what's more exciting is what's the variance between what you know you're doing and what's happening, or what you're trying to tell somebody and what they already know when you're making a piece of art. Okay, so that it seems like that's kind of a disparate thing, and it's very kind of a little too much maybe, but I think actually that this will work okay. So let me talk a little bit about this piece first, and this is a piece that I sort of put aside. I've never been happy with it. I don't think I've ever shown it. And I thought about it. I actually heated up some wax, some encaustic with natural pigment and some day glow worked into it. And I was going to do that, which, you know, I just finished doing that to two other pieces that were also sort of like never really quite made it for me. And I thought, no, you don't want to do that again. And so what I'm thinking about here, and I've never tried this, is I've got this underpainting here. I can see already, just as soon as I put this on, it's gonna, I think this is going to do what I want it to do. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting this French ultramarine on top of the encaustic. I'm putting oil paint on top of the encaustic. And so you can see through it. It's like a translucent layer. And you can see underneath the black, blue, and the light blue now. It's almost a perfect black, and kind of a really nighttime sky blue. It's pretty nice. And so, you know, I wasn't sure what was going to happen there, but you do have a degree of experience. And so, when you're experimenting, you here again, you want to be surprised, but not too much. You don't want to have perfect control, but you don't want to be out of control either, right? So, this is part of how you make decisions in the studio. And then, of course, I could have put this on and it would have been like, oh, well, that's a disaster. I'm not going to do that. How can I reverse that? Or where do I go now? So there's also this strange conversation which goes on with yourself. If there's anybody else here, really. In the studio, as you're working, and you're kind of the agent of change and the initial audience at the same time. And in that sense, perhaps only in that sense, I would say, yeah, we do in the end, we have to kind of make it for ourselves. I mean, I suppose there is, in fact, art by committee. There was that famous thing about the survey about what made a good picture, and it was sort of like it had a cow, it had a river, it had a cottage, it had a sunset. This guy made these paintings that were just like combining all these elements. You end up with this absurdity, of course. Yeah. No, I don't know if I'm going to have enough of this paint. Maybe I'll match this paint here. That may be a bit of a problem. I'll try. I think I have enough here. It was cheap paint. So and I've kind of gotten into the habit of using my paint straight and not cutting it, and using whatever comes out of the tube. It's not pure pigment, but the root of that was something that Diane Tinter said about the icon painters. Like, you know, they don't mix their paint. Now that was a totally different meaning, and what they were doing had a totally different purpose than what I'm doing here. But it just kind of struck me, and I was like, I don't think I really want to mix the paint. I think I just want to put one color on at a time and see what happens. Totally different, but you know, it was just kind of funny. It just kind of struck me, and so I took it someplace else where the initial intent was certainly, you know, it's nothing to do with icon painting, icon painters. I used to have a joke about that. I used to do work that was sort of semi-figurative and semi-abstract. And I used to say, well, the abstract artists are absolutely sure that I'm a figurative artist. And the figurative artists are absolutely sure that I'm an abstract artist. So, you know, like they don't want me to be a member, they want me to be a member of the club. So let's see what's happening. That's somebody trying to increase the length of the warranty on my car. We all get these calls now. Driving industry fraud. Always in good times. Driving industry fraud. So that'll just work itself out and go away. Now, I want to talk a little bit about ideas and recycling ideas in art, and where ideas come from, and you know, what is derivative and what is originality, because that's kind of an important set of questions. And remember, a long time ago, Barack Obama made the comment, nobody does it by themselves, meaning that the American entrepreneur lives in a social situation, derives a lot of benefits from society. So even though they may be a rugged individualist, they're still dependent upon the general scene and support. Of course, people buy the stuff and that sort of thing, right? Well, of course, he got crucified. Well, he got crucified for what he said. He was African American. You know, all our ideas are derived from other places. But then it's kind of a question of where do you take that idea? I mean, because we are all, in a sense, we're individualists, not colonial animals. We do, in fact, work in a sense, especially artists tend to, not always tend to, work on their own. So, what then is there? What is that distance? How are things transformed, and to what extent are they still the same, readable from an original form? You know, I mean, there's a whole tradition. There's no tradition of doing exactly this. I'm sure that other people have used gestural black and white grounds and then put thin layers of oil paint on top of them. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm sure it exists. And so let's assume that it's been done before. And you know, this is kind of, in a sense, it's a lift. I mean, more or less in some way, it's a lift from somebody else. It's fine. Well, if something is exactly the same as how you imagine it, or how an audience would imagine if you present something to somebody, yourself or anybody else, and there's no variance between your thought and expectation, how I believe the thing is going to be, and the way that the thing is, then nothing has moved. And it's as if it never happened in a way, because it's just a perfect overlay on what is expected. You know, it's boring. And this gets into this thing about when is your work no longer happening for yourself? When is the work not moving at all? And you know, you can't get anything out of it. It's like dead, right? Well, that's because what's happening is what you already know is going to happen, right? And likewise, you know, if the audience has the same expectation, it's kind of the same background material, then they're going to see it, and it's going to be like, yep, that's another one of those. Okay, well, that doesn't work, you know. And I mean, it works in a sense. It's just kind of boring. It doesn't move the person in any way. You know, literally, it just doesn't move them. They're not going anywhere with it because they're already there. You know, it's totally within the realm of their expectation of what's going to happen. And on the other side of that, if you go too far in the other direction, you imagine you do something. This is a little trickier, but I think it does happen. You do a piece, and there's no context for the understanding. There's no, you're over, what you've done is over here, and you're over here. That would be really tricky because it's all you, right? But like somebody you're trying to communicate with is over here, you're over here. There's absolutely no union between the two of you. They don't get it at all. It's incomprehensible. And these are obviously theoretical extremes I'm talking about. It's kind of hard to make something that nobody can understand. You know, I think that don't mistake this for failure, where there is understanding, but it's just not particularly relevant or meaningful to the person. And that happens all the time. But think about something that's just, I suppose that this is a bad analogy because I don't think it's true. But, well, you know, they said that they showed photographs to certain people who had never seen photographs before, and they really didn't know how to look at them. It was like, in a sense, they couldn't see what was in front of them. I know when this was my first thesis paper when I dropped out of grad school, I was working on this. You know, there's an artist named Brunelleschi, right? First perspective paintings, mechanical perspective, the way that we're used to thinking about mechanical perspective. And when we look at that now, we see it and we just know that that's the way things are supposed to look, like in a photograph. Photograph, one-point perspective, the lens being your vanishing point, your single eye, not your double eye, sitting in for that, so you see it, and we're trained to think, oh, that's the way everything looks. But when he first showed that to people back in the 1400s, they were like, no, the world doesn't look like that. And it didn't, because they were constantly in motion and they had stereoscopic vision. And they were like, nah, that's, you know, single point perspective is alien. We don't see that as being very real at all. And you could make an argument that, you know, yeah, that they were right. It's not really the way we see things. It's an artificial way of looking at stuff, you know. Many years later, Botticelli made that comment, like, well, Da Vinci was asking, they'd been friends when they were younger. Da Vinci asked him, Sandro, why don't you paint with proper perspective? And he's like, nobody looks at the world that way. I paint as if it's a stage set, and people can walk in front of my piece and read it like a play. It's like, oh, that's cool. And if you look at Botticelli, it's not single point perspective. Single point perspective, real strong, real strong, kind of tricky single point perspective, actually almost completely disappeared from painting the way that it had existed initially within about 50, 75 years. So. But through photography and through its remnant use in painting, we're trained to see that way. It seems normal to us. And so that's good. But it's not. I mean, it's not really particularly the way that you should view things. It's just kind of the way we're used to seeing them. So when that was initially brought out, he had to do these weird experiments to prove to people that this was reality. And I'm not going to get into the details of how he did it, but it was just not a given. You know, people did not think, oh, of course, this is the way things really are. You know, it had to be proven, they had to be taught how to see it. So, the distance between us and other people, or us and ourselves, is sort of like maintaining that distance, not too far, not too close. That the overlay of the circles, you don't want it to look like that. We already know it all. You don't want it to look like that. You want it kind of like that. So you're working with perception and preconceived concepts to a certain extent, and then you're messing with it and changing it and making it different. And what's exciting is it's watching somebody paint, kind of like watching paint dry, I suppose. But it's kind of good background noise for what I'm talking about, I think. And I'll probably use cutaway images when we finish this up and edit it down. So this is actually fairly exciting to me because it was unexpected, and I was going to do something I'd done before. And no, don't do that. Don't do that. It's kind of like, it's okay to repeat yourself if you can find something new in it, In fact, we have to repeat ourselves. It's like inevitable that a great deal of what we're going to do is going to be the same, but then we're looking for change as well. It doesn't have to be all that self-conscious, it's not always best to go out and lay out your plans and everything so that everything is a given. I talked about Marcuse's idea of the piece being finished by the viewer. Well, it's Duchamp and Marcuse, to the closest extent. The completion of the work by the viewer, and so in the studio, you're the initial viewer. The artist themselves is the creator, but also that first person to look and judge. And you're judging it, and I'm judging this, and I'm saying, wow, So I was using these thin painted forms, very regular painted forms, and so I was actually using the quality of the brushwork and the different thicknesses of the paint to give it a similar effect to what I'm getting here by doing the thin overpainting on black and white. But this is much better in a way. I think it's more interesting, and it's kind of a little bit of a discovery for me. This is like discovering America. It's already there. A land not displacing millions of people. Just probably stealing somebody else's deal, but that's okay. Because we're always going to be doing that. And I only use oil painting. That's kind of like my very conservative nature. shouldn't paint oil paint over caustic, right? So it's not like I'm doing it because I think it's going to preserve itself forever. I'm kind of doing it because I like oil paint. I like it. I don't know why. I just like it a lot better than I like it a lot better than acrylic foam. It's just lovely and gorgeous, and it's like they're just some materials that are just nicer to work with. So, even though it's slightly sickening stuff, it's worth it. So I am not bored doing this, and I'm not feeling like I've been here before. Even what I'm doing now is, in a way, a double derivative. Painting over to Unified, well, I've done that with the caustics before. And then, getting this color thing out of the oil, I've done that before. But I haven't done it in this way before. And it gave me a solution to a problem that I didn't have a solution to it, and so I had kind of an impetus and unhappiness, I knew it wasn't right what I had, but I didn't know where to go to fix it. So I kind of synthesized something. Oh yeah, well, no, put away the. I gotta poke a hole. I gotta poke a hole in this wax. It can blow up and reheat. That's still too wet. I can't do it yet. It's a mechanical problem with the wax blowing up and catching fire. But if I was doing this now and I was using the encaustic, it would be kind of, it would be okay, but it wouldn't really be doing what I wanted to do. But I didn't know what I wanted to do until I kind of didn't stumble upon it, but I figured it out through combining other areas, other things that I'd done already that were known to me. So there's nothing original about what I'm doing, but it's different. It looks really different. It is different. So there's kind of a bit of a contradiction there, but it's also just really true. It is the way it is, for sure. And these pieces also are old pieces. Oh, there's another angle on here that I think is kind of interesting. And that is that, okay, so why did I even go back to these wood pieces that I kind of set them aside? And I wasn't really happy with them. I was having all types of problems with them. And in fact, dropping this type of work when I went to VCFA was really kind of important to me because I felt that what I was doing was decorative. It was just decorative stuff. And I didn't want to do things that were just decorative. There's a kind of actually a radical nature to saying I'm just going to make something that's beautiful, because you're defying a lot of things when you do that. If you just find a blue rectangle on the wall, it has no real good reason for existence. It doesn't do a job. It doesn't serve anything. It just is. And so, this notion of art for art's sake, this notion of beauty, and that beauty is in and of itself worthy of existence without serving any other purpose. Because art needs to be really propagandistic, or it told a story, which is kind of propagandistic in some fashion. It's probably not really more propagandistic, And so, if I'm just making something to be beautiful, okay, but somehow it was kind of dying for me, it was not happening, and it felt rote. I can remember once I was working on a piece of sculpture, and this lady, it was kind of a early, mid-1960s New York artist, was visiting the University of Pennsylvania when I was there. And she came out to the Gutman Center and she looked at what I was doing and she said, "Oh, you're pretty good." I seem to be a little bit more popular with artists than with non-artists. But, you're pretty good, but you gotta be careful, if you apply these surfaces, if you apply these kind of gestural surfaces, that you don't want it to be decorative, And I was like, yeah, no, I don't. It needs to be integral to the piece. It needs to be integral to the piece. It can't be an applied decoration, And I think that's actually a pretty good kind of trip line warning thing in your work. If you're working and you're doing a piece and you're working on the surface and it really becomes an applied decoration. It's probably not the best place to be. There's no hard rule that says you can't do it. And I do like the idea of, I remember Aldous Huxley was talking about Jackson Pollock, and he used the phrase apocalyptic wallpaper. Like it could go on forever. You could just kind of keep doing it and it just would go on forever. And Huxley was a fairly important thinker back then. And Pollock was like, he meant it as an insult, but it was a compliment. So I kind of see that, it could work that way. So yeah, apocalyptic wallpaper, that would be kind of interesting. But not, it really, Pollock also talks about losing contact with the work when you're doing it, and that if you fall away from it and then it dies. If you're no longer in contact with what you're doing, it just dies. And I suppose I was having a lot of pieces back then that were dying on me. And, that's nowhere anybody wants to be, right? Nobody wants to be in that kind of situation. You want your work to be alive for you, for people. So I went away from this type of work completely, and with good reason, and started to do ceramic pieces and changed my work around quite a bit. So to come back to these is a little weird. It was like, but one of the reasons why I came back to it was because, and this is kind of like a very gross weakness of human nature thing, but somebody bought one of my old wood pieces that I had resurrected, and I showed it because I was a little weak on wall pieces. And it was something that I had just fixed up recently. I was fairly happy. It seemed like a good resolution of the piece. But I didn't intend to kind of go back into these again. But then I was kind of like, well, I'm a little tired of the ceramics right now. I'm going to give that a rest. And I have these three pieces, and I had kind of worked on them a little bit over time and tried to resolve them, and it was like, It's not happening. It's not working. And I'm horrible with throwing things out, you know, and this is kind of not a good thing. This is a vice. But, you know, I really have trouble letting go. I always want to try to go down with the ship, you know, in the death spiral, and I don't want to give up. I want to keep trying to make it work. It's kind of the pilot's ethos, by the way, too. You know, you should never give up the ship, unless you're going to jump down by parachute. But, you know, so a little stuck maybe in that. Wanting to go back and make it right, wanting to go back and make it work. And then, well, you know, somebody bought it, somebody liked it, it must have clicked in some way. There's something happening there. So let's go back to that again and work back into that. And so, okay, I could do that today. And then, you know, I needed to do a presentation, I needed to do a little video to watch, and I wanted to talk about some of these aspects of studio work and success and failure. And certainly, you know, I've never tried to negate the idea that, well, Louise, my mother used to say, you want to do something nice for an artist, buy their work. And that gets into the whole thing about ghosts and painting and why I stopped being a painter. You know, I paint like this, but I don't do easel painting. Although I thought about that recently. I was like, Louise was a painter. Anyway, so I wanted to come back in and work on this piece again and fix it, because I thought it could be fixed and get it right with me. And I don't know about the rest of the world, but first it's got to be right with me, and then it needs to connect with other people. I mean, if the work is successful with other people, but you hate it, you know, remember Kincaid drank himself to death, right? Very rich man drank himself to death. So it has to be right with you, or you're not going to be happy with it. But then also, there's this consideration of, you know, other people and their reaction. You want to make those connections. You do want it to be something that people get and people want. So that kind of brought about the desire to resurrect this piece and go back into it again. And I'm sure that some of you are watching this and going, well, you're just destroying this piece. It's totally not what you should be doing, but, you know, I'm pretty confident in what I'm doing, that it's the right thing. And, you know, it's just, it has to meet that primary viewer test. It has to meet that, you know, internal rightness before you can really get into where is it or how does it work for other people and that sort of thing. But it still needs to do more than just, you know, speak to yourself. You know, it has to have something going on of interest to others. And, you know, I hope for that. I'm trying for that. We shall see. It's like a mask form in a reclining figure. These little temple creatures do have kind of an existence in my mind, almost persona and all that good stuff. And, yeah. So. But, you know, there's always the possibility that this whole thing in the end will come up as nothing or a total dead end. Well, we're always risking that as we work. I mean, here again, if you made something that was totally predictable and, you know, you knew that, you knew where it was going, you knew how you would get there, and all that stuff. And it's kind of a dead scene. It's not really happening at that point. And I think the work tends to be kind of dead. You know, even if people want it, you can get kind of trapped by that, you know. And they talk about, you know, the trap of success for an artist, where you've got something that works and then you can't change, you know. You're kind of strapped to that. I've never had that problem myself, but it is, apparently so I've been told, a difficulty for some people that they get. And I've actually seen it with very successful artists. And the best, of course, will always fight their way out of the box and continue to work and change. And their work will remain alive for themselves and for others. And so that's a good thing. When I'm done with this, when I've got it all set, I'll kind of work with pulling off a little bit of the paint here, thinning it out just by brushing it out, putting on a little bit more pigment someplace else that looks a little thin, and I'll come back in again. I mean, I'm kind of painting this. Here again, this was kind of a decision I made when I started to work with paint, oil paints on my piece. I kind of paint it almost like I'm painting a house, you know, just go down and paint. And as opposed to the more emotive work that I do with some other mediums. And I can do gestural work with oil too, but most of the time, almost all the time, I'm trying to work it over a surface that already has something happening, or where it's bland, and I'm just trying to use a regular brush stroke. Here it's very different because it's going over this very emotive surface. So I'm using the underpainting in order to make the kind of bland top more alive. But mechanics aren't really important. Mechanics just need to be there to get what you want to get out of it. As far as, you know, feeling some kind of communication going. And so, just like painting a barn. It's not finicky enough for painting a house. It's more like painting a barn. The only drama in this entire thing is, am I going to have enough paint? So really too. I think maybe I will. That's another thing that I always use the paint. Like it's out of the tube. And that's not quite true. I had a few tubes that were really kind of almost, they thickened up a bit through osmosis, so I had to thin them a little bit to use them, but I'm trying not to. Try to keep the paint fairly thick and rich. I think it works a little better that way. And cut it. Of course, the manufacturer will always tell you not to cut the paint. They sell the paint too. Although there's no way to totally avoid it, I'm trying not to be too self-conscious when I'm working. Here again, I think that's part of avoiding being stale or feeling that it's not happening anymore. I think that if I'm too literal in my thoughts, if I'm too mechanical, if I'm too self-conscious in what I'm doing, it becomes dead. And I suppose that goes back to this idea of the dreamer who dreams the dream and the dreamer who inhabits the dream. You know, where does control come from, and how do you get out of that? Because, you know, you're always the manager of the production, because there ain't nobody else here. But at the same time, you're a player in a play, making it work. Experiencing your own setup, and I suppose you will simulate it if you're active. And you're improvising. ago, I knew a guy named Larry Steele, and said, I don't use music in the studio, I never listen to music when I work. So I realized that I enjoyed my time in the studio more, but the work wasn't better, it was worse. I told that to Erica Wanamaker. She was like, I don't care. I'm going to have music in the studio. I find it very helpful at work. Something to help carry me along. This is always how I feel about music. It's interesting. So I talked about, one of the reasons I went back to these pieces again is they walk. Well, that's great. However, what I'm doing now is very alien to kind of the nature of the piece that was bought. It's a very different treatment of the surface. It's the same, but it also brings in a radical change at the same time. Now for me, that's within that kind of a Venn diagram overlap area of where I want to be. But, judging from my past experience with that sort of thing, it's probably not along the lines of what brought it to the favor of the person who bought it. So that, what I'm doing here may very well be to bring it within my area of comfort as far as, or accessibility, comfort's probably not a really good term, accessibility as far as what is new, but also within the realm of my own internal logic in what I'm doing. But, it may very well be that I'm actually drawing further away from that quality which made it attractive to others. But as I said earlier, if it doesn't work for you, there's no point. Which is not the same as to say that I do it only for myself. But it has to be what I want, When I work for other people, it has to be what they want. But when I work for myself, it really has to be what I want it to be. And then, it hopefully will somehow resonate with somebody else, and they'll make a connection with it and kind of get a little bit of what I got out of it. And that's, nice. That's what I would very much like. I want very much for the work to be accepted and to be popular, but it has to be first and foremost what I want it to be. And I have tried several times in my life to just do things to make money, and it has always been a complete disaster. No matter how badly things have gone when I've made something which has just been, primarily for myself, it has never gone as badly as it has when I've tried to do something to somebody else's specification, where it wasn't a piece where I was just a hired gun, but it was rather, what it was supposed to be, what I wanted it to be, and it wasn't. And that has always been a real unmitigated disaster. So, I know better than that at least. So, and I thought, I'll just paint it blue. And that will pull it all together, and it will actually give it the feeling that I've always wanted it to have. And it'll be the same as what I've been doing, but it'll also be different. And that's what I'm going to do. And so that's what I've done. And, it's not, I suppose, a universally applicable notion or anything like that, but certainly it has proven itself to be true in my case for me. And I kind of have to respect that. I have to kind of respect that, for myself. I'm not sure how I really feel about it at this point. But I hated it before. It always drove me crazy. I don't hate it now. I think maybe this is good.